Hello, everybody. So this is my top 32 life recovery girl list, and from nationals. And I wanted to just go over the list, but also talk a little bit about my tournament overall. So the tournament got off for me, off to a great start. In fact, I was 6-0 in Swiss in round six, and the only way I could possibly not make top cuts was to lose the next three rounds, and then I proceeded to lose the next three rounds. And I think, yeah, that was obviously that sucked a little bit, but it happens. I think I could have maybe played a little bit more accurately, and I was getting tired towards the end of the day. And my opponents were all very, very strong, of course, especially once you get late into the deep into the bracket. Your opponents are going to be very good. So they all did a well-deserved job and made top cuts. My last three opponents, so kudos to them. Um, but yeah, and then I did want to talk a little bit about how I came to this deck before the tournament. I arrived to Dallas like a day before the event, and I actually brought like a pile of cards. Most of them were actually water cards because my plan was to do some testing on Thursday and decide whether I would play Life Recovery Girl or Water Recovery Girl. And the reason I hadn't decided yet is because I only started playing Recovery Girl maybe a week or two before the event started, and I initially just was playing Water Recovery Girl because that was what Recovery Girl symbol, like that's just the Recovery Girl symbol people have been on lately. I didn't quite like it, just because of a playstyle thing. In fact, in the testing, my teammate said, "Why do you keep trying to block? You shouldn't block your Recovery Girl." And then I realized, I should try and find a list that maybe is a little bit more suited to me other than the water list that rarely blocks and mostly takes things and juries the damage down. So the Life Recovery Girl list, it still doesn't block a lot, but you do want to block with this list, especially early. We run things like Desperate Plea and Keiko's Aid because we want to get value out of our blocking. And so, yeah, we do block early, and we block late too, because that's our main answer to these big damage moves that Recovery Girl often struggles with. And um, I think the key that unlocked this Life Recovery Girl list was realizing that this Immortal Shapeshifter recuperation time combo in the late game is like assembling the pieces of Exodia. If you have 4 Immortal Shapeshifter and 4 recuperation time, the thing that's crazy about this is when you destroy a foundation, you can gain up to 4 health with Immortal Shapeshifter, because Immortal Shapeshifter has a response after one of your foundations is destroyed, gain a health, as long as you check a 5. And the recuperation time says as whenever you gain health, you give -1 damage. And if you have 4 of them, you give -4 damage. So if you have 4 mortals and 4 recuperation times, you basically get a heal 4 and give -16 damage to every single attack your opponent plays, and every single attack you play per foundation you destroy. So if you destroy multiple foundations, you could, in theory, gain 8 health, do -32 damage. You could gain 12 health if you destroy 3. So it just gets ridiculous. It's honestly just one of the strongest combos in the game, and honestly, there's just nothing in the game that can get over that. Besides some of the decks that beat me, which I'll talk about. But so you do want to get to this late game of 4 mortals and 4 recuperation times out. If you can get there, you're probably going to win. So that's the idea of the deck. And yeah, that's why we have to be on life, because Immortal Shapeshifter is not on water. And I do think you can play recuperation time on water. It will still be very good, but and we saw Corey, who got second place at Nats, run recuperation time under the water symbol. But I do think the benefit of life having Immortal Shapeshifter gives you an even stronger late game because of that combo. What you do sacrifice in this list is you're a little bit more vulnerable early. And that's where I was losing to Mimics, and in my rounds 8 and 9, were both Mimic players. They were able to kind of rush me down with things like Walk the Dog and pumping huge amounts of damage on like turn 2 or turn 3. That's often where I was dying, and then that was the main thing that was, I think, um, stopping my run. The other thing that's going to stop this ultimate combo is stunning out everything. So now I'm talking about Travis's Crystalist. That was my loss in round 7. And yeah, that deck can literally just stun your whole board. And it didn't matter that I built several Heroic Assistants. They just were burned through so fast because Krista can stun 4 or 5 per attack for literally no cost, essentially, because of how her character works. And that means that once your recuperation times and immortals are committed, they're no longer going to be gaining you health. So yeah, those are the weaknesses of the deck. Outside of that, my other matchups over the tournament, I think Endeavor surprisingly gave me a lot of trouble because Endeavor has a attack that has a deadlock that says your rival cannot gain health this turn. That was hard to fight through, and honestly, I only won that match because of Vast Strength. If I didn't have this card, that match was gonna be lost for sure. Um, and I do think my other matchups, there were some matchups that were honestly just very easy, just because of the way Recovery Girl works. So Rodan really has very little chance into Recovery Girl because Rodan just does not pump damage enough. Um, and then I think this deck is pretty good against Bertolt, surprisingly, unless they rush you down immediately. Um, and so, like, those really easy, um, really favorable matchups is part of why you might want to play this deck, especially in this current meta. You have a lot of decks that kind of are um, not able to have any answer to, a large amount of minus damage on all of their moves, especially string decks. I think Recovery Girl eats string decks alive just because of the way her character works. And so you really kind of beat the string decks and you beat the Rodans of the world. And you probably have a tough matchup into Mimics and Kristas. Okay, anyway, I've blabbered on long enough about what my tournament was like. It was a blast. I had a lot of fun. Ultimately, top 32. And here are the cards. So we run 4 Surprising Skill. Now, the reason I was running Surprising Skill out first was because of Vast Hybrid Chimera Kraken, but this actually turns out to be very relevant in the meta because of Krista. And that is really nice as well. The other thing I was really worried about was Ice Sword Execution. That was one of the cards that I felt could actually get through this combo, especially you have 4 copies of Immortal and 4 copies of Recuperation Time, ideally, and Ice Sword Execution just completely stops that. And so that's why we're not just running Surprising Skill. To jump ahead a little bit, we're running Heroic Assistance. These are our stun hate, selective target stun hate counters, and both of them do exactly the same thing. When one of your rivals is committed, you can flip it, ready, a foundation, or in Heroic Assistance case, 2 foundations. I will say I would definitely bump this up to a 4 of between main and board because this card saved me a lot. Next, we have High Value Target. The reason High Value Target is in here as a 4 of is because of the before one of your foundations would be destroyed due to rival effect, destroy this foundation instead response. It also helps block, and that's nice. So I've always liked this card for that, but it's mainly in there as a way to protect your other foundations when you face Godzilla or Berthold or actually Colossal Detonation. Although we have a different counter to Colossal Detonation in Vast Strength. So we're not really using High Value Target to stop that card in particular. Although if you don't have Vast Strength and it gets resolved against you, sometimes you need these High Value Targets readied. Next, we have 2 Desperate Plea, Brief Respite and 3 Best Buddies. These are essentially the same card, and I'm running a total of 5 of them. I might bump it up a little bit, but you also don't want to draw too many of these cards in your hand because they're not particularly good in multiples. But essentially, the reason we're doing a split of 2 and 3 is to help trigger different names for researching the answer, as well as it gives us a way to sacrifice foundations that isn't giving our opponents attack damage, and that's actually really good in the early game. And it's also good late game, especially best buddies. The fact that this is a response on play means that you can do a lot of shenanigery, even into like I think flash attacks, which is another way that sometimes players try to play around Recovery Girl. I already talked about Desperate Plea, but I just want to kind of go big picture for a moment with this deck. Uh, in my opinion, this Life Recovery Girl list, we're playing these four check attacks to, but the reason we're playing these four check attacks is because not just to help our checks, it's actually just value. I think these four check attacks are just well statted, good attacks that you just want to be playing anyway because they're just so high stats and they do so much for your game plan and they just do so they're just so powerful. Like these are just generically, I think, powerful attacks. Now, there is one reason that you don't see a lot of people playing these attacks. It's because they are such high difficulty that it's really hard to play them. But I think this plays really well into Recovery Girl because you commit a bunch of foundations to play these attacks and then you blow them up. And between Immortal Shapeshifter and Recovery Girl's Face, this deck actually blows up a lot of foundations. And I kept finding that I didn't have enough foundations to feed the Immortal Shapeshifter engine in my testing. And so I kept adjusting the list until I whittled down the attacks to just 16 attacks, which is a very low ratio, even for Recovery Girl. And I put in cards like Desperate Plea because what Desperate Plea does for you is it helps you build. And one of the really cool things you can do with Desperate Plea is you can actually half block something because Recovery Girl says when you take damage, you build a foundation from your discard pile, not when you don't block. So what I would often do, especially early on, is I would half block something, then I would respond Desperate Plea, build it in, take the damage, build another thing in, and because of that, Recovery Girl can actually build a lot of foundations. Next, I want to talk about New Training Method. This is not only a great foundation to play, but it's also one of the best things you can build from your discard pile because it lets you then build another one from your hand. So you can keep building cards even when your opponent is attacking you at a ridiculous pace. And so, yeah, this is just an amazing card. It also helps us find the immortals and the recuperating times because when we check them, we can add them to our hand, which is super relevant. Next, we have the one evading copy. I find this card to be like a necessary card to have just because one of the ways Recovery Girl loses is when your opponent throws a 30 speed, 30 move attack. Not a lot of decks can do that, but for the decks that can, you want an evading copy. And so, yeah, it's in here for the Elder Togeros of the world, the Dekus of the world that are just sending these huge, massive speed attacks that are for a lot. And yeah, we have one in the board, but one in the main board and three in the sideboard for that matchup. Actually, I think evading copy is one of the reasons you might want to play Life Recovery Girl because I think Life Recovery Girl has it's less strong into. I think you sacrifice some early game consistency as life, but you gain a lot of cards that help you answer your weaknesses. So I think a card like Evade Copy just kind of covers your bases as a Recovery Girl a lot better than Water has in terms of what Water has answers to. Because I think a Water Recovery Girl is just gonna lose to like a Deku or a an Elder Toguro, specifically Elder Toguro actually, because the damage can't be reduced. That Elder list actually just demolishes Recovery Girl because of Sports Festival Stadium. Okay, anyway, that's why Evading Copy is there. Next, I want to talk about Body Rejuvenation. This card saved me a lot. It often was the best thing to build for my discard if my opponent was trying to kill me. This just says, after this card enters your discard pile, gain 2 health. And it's really, really good. You can blow it up with Recovery Girl's Enhance, even if you have no other destruction outlets. And it's just a way to gain health and then trigger your recuperation times even more. So, very good card. I think it is something that I was happy to run 4 of. The Enhance is also sneaky good. And I'll talk about how we actually get cards in our hand, even though we're a 5-hander in a bit. Hero Consistency I already talked about. One incredible display. I found it hard to include more than one of this. In retrospect, I wish I had more because it would have actually been really good into like Krista and some of the decks I was having trouble beating, like Mimic. But I do think that in general, um, we have other ways to utilize the stuff we block with. Like Desperate Plea kind of covers us in terms of this response commit after you block with the foundation, because most of the time you want to be building the foundation you block with, not returning it to your hand. And in terms of the response commit, I will say, so one thing you should know about this deck is that we don't actually care about momentum as much as the water list. I think the water list has, like, they want momentum really, really badly. And for us, it's like, whatever, because we aren't trying to use last second rescue. We're trying to use recuperation time and mortal shapeshifter. And our low attack ratio means we're often not going to have momentum. So that's why Incredible Display is only a one of, despite being an insane card. I have more in the sideboard, so it's not the end of the world to only have one main. Next, I want to talk about probably one of the best cards, and another reason to play Life is Vast Strength. This is another way that Life, I think, shores up the bad matchups that the Water Recovery Girl has, because Mimic can actually just pick up Colossal Detonation and blow up your whole board if you're Water. But if you have a Vast Strength on your board, it actually just says, we're going to negate that Colossal Detonation. So that was huge for me. Obviously, I still lost to 2 Mimics, but I did beat 2 Mimics in Swiss, and it was largely off of the back of this card. Now, one of the Mimics wasn't running Colossal Detonation, but against the one that did, in terms of the 2 Mimics I beat, the Vast Strength really helped. And I think that this Vast Strength also answers a lot of stuff early, too, like Lethal Slash, anything that's a 2-check. So, it helps you against the Bakugo matchup. I think this card is just kind of insane right now. It's really good into Krista, although, honestly, what I found against Krista is they would simply play the Wall Maria's Might and then pick up another Wall Maria's Might, so I would always need 2 Vast Strengths, otherwise, it felt really bad. Yeah. But yeah, so Vast Strength, just an amazing card. Next, for Immortal Shapeshifter, goes without saying, one of the key cards of the deck. For Keiko's Aids, now I did say this deck struggled in the early game. Keiko's Aid is how we kind of try and overcome that. If we can have a Keiko's Aid and get the block off and give them +2 difficulty, sometimes that is enough to live. So it's purely in here for the early game. I often just blow it up in the late game. Next, we have 4 YY Pussycats. Now, I actually love this card in this list in particular because it does 2 really important things for you. First of all, it helps fill your discard pile. And that's actually really important in this deck because you need to be having enough cards in your discard pile to have good targets to build in with Recovery Girl. So this form is just amazing. It helps dig through your deck faster. It helps you find the right foundations because you really want to be finding Immortal and you really want to be finding the recuperation time. So it's important to kind of selectively get those foundations instead of whatever foundation you want. The other reason I love this card is because if your opponent sends lazy pokes at you, which they should not be doing, but if they do it, maybe they have to poke, maybe they have to attack to get something going, you can take the damage, and if you're feeling safe enough, you can build this with Recovery Girl, and then that makes you a 6-hander on your next turn. And for me, this is actually why at first I didn't like Recovery Girl as much, because you're not drawing enough cards. And I think a card like YY Pussycats really helps address that. It's just amazing to have this form speed card draw that you don't have to attack to get this card draw off. It's a form speed one. So because it's a form speed ability, you can actually just play this and build out. Last Second Rescue as a 2 of, I wasn't quite brave enough to cut it to a 1 of or not run it at all. In retrospect, I don't even know if we play this card. It's okay, but it's kind of not great. When I take damage from Recovery Girl, I want to build in my immortals, and I want to build in my recuperation times. Or I want to build in my vast strength, or I want to build in my heroic assistance. I never want to be building in last second rescue. It's very, very short term, in my opinion, in this deck. So, for what it's worth, I don't actually think this card is that good in the life build. In the water build, it's amazing. But for this deck, because we have Immortal and because we have Recuperation Time, I think we need to prioritize getting that combo out. And once we have that combo out, we don't really need Last Second Rescue because the Immortal and Recuperation Time combo is going to be covering us for all of that. I do think it's nice to have maybe like a 1 of or 2 of. Like, it obviously feels really good, but you're going very negative on resources to use this card. And yeah. Alright. Anyway, I've blabbed on long enough about this hot take. Obviously, I know everyone thinks this card is insane, but just saying my experience with it is that it's kind of mid. One Blood Evaluation. Honestly, this is kind of a card that I probably should cut, but I love this card, so I'm not going to. Or I didn't cut it before Nats, just because this card is something that I think, like, I don't know, I just really like this card. I like drawing cards, I like readying cards. Blood Evaluation works really well with Heroic Assistance and Surprising Skills, so you can ready it without needing momentum and then get a draw off, which is actually really good. So having this as a 1 of is totally fine. I think it's good. But again, we don't get momentum that often, so I think you could cut it if you wanted to. Next, to researching the answer. I wanted to play more of these. I really, really did. But between Recovery Girl being able to build it in and the fact that you really don't want to draw into multiples of this, I think 2 of is the correct answer. We also aren't trying very hard to run a bunch of 1-ofs. In fact, the whole idea of this deck is to get 4 Immortals and 4 Recuperation Times out. And so kind of the strategy of the deck is kind of against the trigger for researching, because researching really asks you to have a lot of different names of foundations in your stage. But it's such a good card that we're running it anyway. I think this card is nuts. Being a 6-hander, between, like, the difference between a 5-hander and a 6-hander is like an ocean apart. A 5-hander can get away with so much more shenaniganry. Recovery Girl has insane on-face abilities, and I think her biggest downside is the fact that she is a 5-hander. And researching the answer says, no, we're actually a 6-hander. And that's just insane. Obviously, we need to work for this, and we do need to work pretty hard for this. But I do think that every time I got this off, I felt way stronger and way better about the game. Next, we have Meeting Hanji. This is such a good card, and I think people are absolutely sleeping on it. Meeting Hanji is Enhance Flip, discard 2 cards, and draw 2 cards. That colon placement is everything, because if you think about a card like Latent Skill, the big issue with Latent Skill is because the discarding is a cost, you have to have the 2 cards in your hand to discard before you can play that ability. But because this is after the colon, it's not a cost, it's an ability. And so you can pay the cost, which is flipping this foundation, use the ability, discard 2 cards, even if you have no cards in hand, and then draw 2 cards. So this effectively means you can build 5, have 0 cards in hand, but if you have a Meeting Hanji on your stage, at any point you can just flip it and draw 2 cards, and now it's like you were a 7-hander. You can still block even though you built a ton. And the water list gets around the fact that, like, the water list doesn't block, so I understand why water doesn't play this, but I think this is really great in the life list where we do want to be blocking, we do want to be building. This also randomly sometimes draws 3 cards if you discard one of your attacks, and it helps you sculpt and dig for attacks on offense. I think this card is just amazing. Would never not run 4. Moment of Peace. Now, this is just in here for the deadlock. I think the enhance is fine, but really we don't want to be flipping our foundations. Our foundations are all so good. We're not running any spam that, like, isn't very, very good. I think, and that's one of the things about this deck. Like, if you look through all of the foundations, every single foundation is very strong. And so, like, no matter what foundations you're drawing, you're usually always happy because the quality of each foundation is very high. And that's why I don't want to be flipping my own foundations usually at all. Um, so I didn't use the enhance that often. Obviously, there are times where you commit foundations and then they're useless when they're committed, and so you might as well flip them. So I'm not saying that flip is never useful, but yeah, that's why I wouldn't run like 2 or 3 of this card, even though the deadlock is kind of nuts. Recuperation time. Obviously, need to run 4 of this. Next, we have our attacks, draw time attacks. Now, the reason this is here over something like Devour, and the reason we run draw time attacks is because this attack actually synergizes with recuperation time because you can get the damage from the Blitz. Devour, the reason I took that card out is because the health gain happens after that attack deals damage, so it doesn't actually synergize with the recuperation time. I also think Devour is really understated, and Jaw Titan is actually well statted, so that is another reason there. And then finally, like our list gains so much life through means. Okay, yeah. Let me actually back up a little bit and talk more about the super combo. So yes, we have a super combo of Immortal and Recuperation Time, but one thing that you should know is that this super combo only works if you've taken damage. If you're at full health, you can't use Recuperation Time to reduce the damage or pump the damage of an attack. So we actually don't want to be gaining health, and sometimes I would not first form with Recovery Girl so that I could have damage on my character to heal back so that I could pump damage or reduce damage, either way. So that's a very important thing to know. And actually, one of the weaknesses of the deck is if your opponent never attacks you because they don't want to attack you, um, you actually don't get access to your damage pumping because we have no way to cut our own life. And I was finding that like sometimes players would kind of figure that out and exploit that, and yeah, that is sometimes rough. But we have another way to win games. We have ways to win games where our opponent is not doing anything. So and that's coming up. Next, we have female Titan attacks. I think this card is insane because it's a 7 mid 7 or 7 high 7 on a 7 diff, which is good stats. And then the Blitz draw card is just really good. Um, the reason it's so good is because even if you draw it early, you can just throw it out and then draw into a foundation, and it feels great. Like this card is amazing. So just an amazing card early or late. And then now we're going to talk about the 2 cards in our deck that kind of stomp over decks that are trying to play around you by not doing anything. So, like, there's 2 ways to approach the Recovery Girl matchup. You can try to kill Recovery Girl early, or you can try and kill her late. And killing her late often means not attacking her so that she can't build foundations because you're never dealing damage to her. But in order to do that, you have to not attack. And if you're not attacking, Unexpected Outcomes is so strong. Unexpected Outcomes says, Blitz, your rival reveals their hand, remove an attack from it, and then you can play their attack. So you're going to ruin people who are trying to sculpt against you with this card, and you can just steal so much great stuff. Removing stuff like Determined Advance or Walk the Dog or a deadlock attack that they're trying to hold on to. All those are amazing. And Unexpected Outcomes is just such a well-statted move on top of that. A 10 mid 8, and it kind of has Echo, so just an amazing, amazing card. This is often how you're going to kill people, and it's definitely the best attack in the deck. But we have another way to kill people, or kind of like win the late game against people who are not attacking us, and that's Colossus's Thermal Blast. So the only reason this is in the deck is because against someone who literally does not attack you at all, you have to do something to kind of advance the game because, if they're build one passing, at some point you have to do something, otherwise it's just going to be a draw. And Colossus's Thermal Blast is kind of that answer because if you're both building and passing, you can play this card and kind of take out their stage. And you can give this throw. So unless they have throw hate, you can actually blow up their whole board. And yeah, so this is just like the ultimate end of game win condition. I do think this is like another reason to play life, because like if your opponent is really defensive, you can crack boards that are extremely defensive with this card because they won't have a board after you play this. And sometimes you'll play multiple of these over the course of a game because we just build that much. Next, the last card in our list is one Ruthless Mockery. This card is pretty bad. I would say I would cut it. I don't know. It's good into certain matchups that we're already good against, like string decks. I don't think this does much into a lot of decks right now, just because um, it's so hard to block with a 3 mid block. And when we're blocking, we usually want to be blocking for Desperate Plea, and we want to be blocking with lower block mods. So that's kind of why Ruthless Mockery has not done well for me. I think if you're playing a Besiege deck or something, yeah, you should slide these in, but I would have been happier with this in the sideboard for sure. But still, it's a decent card. All right. The sideboard is mostly kind of just more copies of cards in the main deck that are good in certain matchups. So we've got the Evading copy for the tall decks, Heroic Assistance for the stun decks, Incredible Display for response decks. Anytime I want to cancel some of the responses. And then this card is purely in here for the Byakko matchup. So the reason this is so good against Byakko is because whenever Byakko hits you, you can unflip it, and it just helps you protect your immortals and your recuperation times from getting flipped. Because if Byakko can flip enough of your foundations that you have no face-up foundations, you're basically dead. Because this character needs the combo. We need the recuperation time, and we need the Mortal Shapeshifter combo. And that is like just um it's a strength and a weakness of the deck, right? Because the strength is because the broken thing our deck is doing is not necessarily um completely reliant on our character. It kind of gets around things like sealing and stuff like that. But on the other hand, we're weaker to foundation answers. So that's why I think Hard to Kill is kind of a necessary card to play because Byakko will kill you. Um, yeah, that's another tough matchup for this deck. All right, I think I've blabbered on long enough about this deck. Yeah, let me know what you think in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time.